Hello guys, welcome to the Python series on LearnIn. My name is Nse. In the previous videos, we saw how to download and install Python and VS Code. We also saw how to install extensions and packages in VS Code. The link to these videos are in the description. Having installed Python and VS Code, we are ready to write code. But just before we write any code, I must mention that in programming, code is typically written to manipulate or process data, and data can come in various types. To understand and write code effectively, it is absolutely important to have a good understanding of these data types as it relates to the programming language that you're writing. What are data types? In programming, data types are used to categorize and define the different kinds of data that can be manipulated and stored in a program. Each programming language has its own set of data types. In this tutorial, our focus is Python. So let's see the data types in Python. Python, like every programming language, has its own data types. Some built-in data types in Python are the numeric data types, under which we have int, float, and complex. The string data type, where we have str. There is the mapping data type, where we have dict, short for dictionary. There is the set data type, where we have set. We have the Boolean data type, where we have bool, and sequence types, which include list, tuple, and range. In this series, we are going to consider the data types one after the other as we progress. Particularly today, we will talk about the numeric data types. Numeric data types are integer, float, and complex. Think of integer as positive and negative whole numbers, just as shown here in these examples. Think of float as representing numbers with decimals. It could be positive or negative, just like we see here in these examples. Think of complex as representing complex numbers. Now let's see how these numeric data types can be written. For this, I am going to use VS Code. So head over to your desktop, right click on it, click on new, click on folder, give your folder a name, any name at all. I'll call mine basics. Hit the enter key of your keyboard. Open VS Code. Here in VS Code, click on file, click on open folder. My folder is on the desktop, so I'll click desktop here, and I will click on the folder here, basics, click on it, and then come here and click select folder. Now we have this folder here in VS Code. You can close this. Inside this folder, we are going to create a file to write our code. So come here, click on this new file icon, give your file a name. I'm just going to call mine main.py. Remember .py because it is a Python file. Hit the enter key of your keyboard, and we are ready to write code. So now that we have seen the numeric data types in Python, let's use them in performing basic arithmetic operations. Before we proceed, I want to talk about this print function. Print function is going to display your output on the terminal or console. Let's see how it works. Let's just type a random value. Let's say print 2. Control S or Command S to save, then run the code. If you look in the console, you're going to see 2. Let's do something like 2 plus 2. Let's save again. Now let's run the code. If you look in the console, you're going to see 4. So basically, print function displays the output of your code on the terminal. Another function that I want to talk about before we proceed is the type function. Type function shows the data type. For us to be able to see any data type printed on the console, we are going to wrap this type function with the print function. So we're going to have something like print type. Let's put 2 in there. Let's save. I'm going to clear the console just by typing clear and hitting enter, and the console is cleared. Now let's run this line of code to see the type of data that we have here. So I'm going to run the code, and if you look in the terminal here, you're going to see that we have int, meaning that this 2 here is an integer. Let's make changes to it. Let's keep adding just zeros, for example. Let's save and run the code again. We'll still have int here showing that this number here is an integer. Now let's introduce a decimal point. Remember, we said in our definition that float represents numbers with decimal points. Let's save, Control S or Command S to save. Let's run the code by clicking on this run code icon here. Notice here that we have float written out. So with this type function, it is very easy to determine the type of your data. Let's replace this with something like 4 plus 5. Let's save. Let's run this code. Notice here that we have complex, meaning that this data here is of the complex type. Remember that the 3 numeric data types are int, float, complex. So with this type function and the help of this print function, we are able to see our data types displayed here on the terminal. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, if you have any questions or you have any comments, please say them in the comment section and I'll definitely respond to them. As part of the basics, Python allows you to perform arithmetic operations with the help of operators like this is the plus sign, this is the minus sign, this asterisk is for multiplication, this slash here is for division, and this is the modulo operator. We are going to see real examples showing how this works. Again, let's bring back our print function. That's the way that we are going to see our output displayed on the terminal. Let's start with addition. You can simply say 5 plus 5 and save. Run the code. You will see 10 printed here on the terminal. If we change this to minus and we save and we run the code, you're going to see 0 printed here on the terminal. Let's change this value to maybe 15 and let's save. Let's run the code again. You're going to see 10 here, and we all know that 15 minus 5 is 10. So with arithmetic operations, all you have to do is use this plus sign for addition and use this minus sign for subtraction. Now let's use this multiplication sign. the asterisk. All you have to do is just type it there where you want it to be, and let's run this code, and you're going to see 75 printed. 15 times 5 is 75. And this also works with floats. Let's turn this into a float by introducing this decimal point. Let's save and then let's run the code. You're going to see that we have our results printed here. It is worthy of note that anytime a float is introduced into an arithmetic operation like this, the result is going to be a float, unless you take steps to stop it from being a float. Don't worry if you find any of this confusing. As we progress, we are going to see real life examples that will help you better understand how these things work. For now, this is just the basics. Now we are going to go to this slash here, which I said is used for division. We have slash here. I'm going to clear the console so that you see better. Let's save and then let's run the code, and we have 3.0 printed out. Notice that it's printed out as a float. If we do not want it to be as a float, we can introduce another slash there. Let's save. Let's run the code. Now notice that this time we have just 3 printed out. While this double slashes help to take away the decimal point, it is important to note that your output is going to be rounded down. Let's change this to 7 and let's make this 150. Let's save and let's run the code. Notice that we have a whole number printed here, 21. Now if we take out one of these slashes and we save and then we run the code, you're going to see that we have 21 points, all of these other digits that come after it. Okay, so now let's take this back to 15 and let's bring back our second slash. Let's save and let's run the code. Now notice that we have 2 here. Remember what I just said, that when you have these 2 slashes like this, your output is going to be rounded down. 15 divided by 7 is 2.5. Going by the arithmetic rule that we know, 2.5 should be rounded up to 3, but this double slash here rather gives us 2, showing that it rounds down. So you have to be very watchful of this sort of rules in order to ensure that you apply them exactly the way you want to apply them in your code. We can also double this asterisk. Let's see how to do that. Let's see what it comes to. First, let's have 2 times 2. Let's save. Let's run the code. We have 4 printed out. I'm going to clear the console again. Now let's double it and let's run the code. We still have 4 printed out. That really doesn't show anything different. Now let's change this 2 here to 3. Let's save and let's run the code. Notice that we have 8 printed out this time around, and that's simply 2 raised to the power of 3. So this double multiplication sign here is called the exponential operator. It is used to raise one number to a given power. Just like we saw here, This means 2 raised to the power of 3. If we have any further doubts, let's have 2 times 2 times 2 written out like this, and let's save and let's run this code, and notice that we have the exact same values here, 8 and 8. 2 raised to the power of 3 is 8, same as 2 times 2 times 2. So if you want to raise any number to a given number, the operator to use is this double asterisk. The last operator that I want to talk about in this lesson is this modulo operator. The modulo operator obviously is represented with this symbol that we all know as the percent symbol. It calculates the remainder when one number is divided by another. Let's see how that works. I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to have 5 modulo 2. Let's save and let's run the code. Notice what we have here. The output here is 1, and that's exactly the remainder you get when you divide 5 by 2. Let's see another value. Let's say 101 mod 10. Let's save and let's run the code. We still have 1 here, and that's exactly the remainder that you get when you divide 101 by 10. Let's talk about the parentheses. Parentheses are used to group different operations together to indicate the order of operation. Let's see how that works. Let's say that we have 5 times 2 minus 1, and we want to print that, of course. Let's save. Let's run the code. We have 9 here, and the order is that multiplication is first of all done, and then 1 is subtracted from the result of this multiplication. That's why we have 9 here. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. I'm going to write it out here so that it will be very clear before I wrap it with the print function. Let's have 5 times, let's introduce this parenthesis, 2 minus 1. Now that we have this, I'm simply going to cut it and I'll paste it within this print brackets. Let's save. Now if you find any of this confusing, don't worry, I'm just trying to show how these operators work. Now that we have it written this way with this parenthesis introduced here, let's run the code and see the results that we have. Now this time, notice that we have 5 printed out here, and that is because this parenthesis is executed first before anything outside of the parenthesis. 2 minus 1 is 1, and then 1 times 5 is 5. These are some of the things that are really important to note. Here is the summary of the operators and the operations that they perform. This is for addition, this is for subtraction, this is for multiplication, this is for division. The modulo operator shows the remainder in division, and parenthesis shows the order of operation. Now let's talk about variables. While we have been able to carry out various operations so far, we have no means of preserving the results, which means we cannot refer to them later or use them in other operations, which is what programming runs on. To preserve any of the results that we have seen here today, we have to devise a means to store them, and the way that that is done is with the use of something called variables. What are variables? In programming, variables are used to store and preserve data or values that are computed or obtained during the execution of a program. Without variables, it would be challenging to retain and utilize the results of operations in other parts of the program. By using variables, you can assign values to them and manipulate those values throughout the program. That sounds like a lot. Let's simply just see how it works. So let's say that I have age set to 18. Age here is a variable, and this equal to sign that in this case is called the assignment operator. 18 here is the value that is being stored in this age variable. So now that we have 18 stored in age, I'm going to make this lowercase. We can use age in place of 18 anywhere within this file. Let's print age. Notice that we have 18 printed here on the terminal, just like we would have 18 printed if we said print 18 directly. Let's save, and you can still see that we have 18 here. We can use age in performing some operations as well. Let's start by saying print age divided by 2. Let's save. Let's run the code. Notice that we have 9 shown here to us, and 18 divided by 2 is 9. We can also subtract 2. Let's save. Let's run the code, and you can see that we have 16 printed here. 18 minus 2 is 16. Let's do one last one. Let's just say age plus 5. Let's save, and then let's run the code. Notice that we have 23, and 23 is the result of adding 5 to 18. Instead of printing the result of this operation directly, we can have it stored in another variable. Let's say results equals age plus 5. Let's save, and let's print results instead. Let's save, and let's run the code. Notice that here we still have 23, just like we had when we printed age plus 5 directly. And that is because we assigned this result here to this variable here. Okay, I think that sounds confusing. Let's replace it with x, and let's print x instead. Let's make this print x. Let's save. Let's run the code. Now notice that we still have 23 here. That's because we assigned the result of age plus 5 to x. So we can now use this our variable x at any given point in this program, and Python will recognize it as 23. You can see that working with variables makes it pretty easy to get around. While naming variables in Python, there are some rules to note, like a variable name cannot start with a number. Let's say we change this to 2. You can already see that we have this error line here showing that this is not acceptable. So let's change it back to the way that it was. Also, you cannot use words separated with white space, like age A. You can already see that it's giving us an error here. However, a common convention in Python is to use the snake case. That's where you have an underscore between different words. It's called snake casing. Snake casing is where words are separated with an underscore, just like we saw here. Another example would be first name equal to Nse, rather than try to write just first name. Python is going to complain. This is not acceptable. It's not something that you can do. So you want to really pay attention and avoid that. Also, you have to avoid Python keywords while naming variables. Python keywords are some reserved words in Python that you as a developer cannot use. To see those keywords, type help and keywords just like this. Let's save. Let's run this code. And here on the terminal, you're going to see these keywords listed. These are words that you cannot use in naming your variables in Python. False, none, true, and, as, assert, async, await, and all of this. That being said, I'll just say feel free to name your variables as you like while paying attention to the rules involved. And these rules are really important, because if you go against any of these rules while naming your variables, you will run into troubles, you have errors, and your code will obviously not run. Also, you have to note that Python is case sensitive. So age is not the same as age in Python, and that's because Python is case sensitive. That's what we mean by Python being case sensitive. So you have to pay particular attention also when you're naming your variables. Ensure that your casing is uniform, in the sense that if you have age equals to 18 and you want to print age, if you instead print age in place of age, you are going to have an error, because here is uppercase A while here is lowercase a, and that makes all the difference. You cannot use them interchangeably. So you should pay particular attention to your letter casing. To be safe, you may want to use lowercase all through. I'd say use lowercase all through. In Python, it is a common convention and considered good practice to use lowercase letters for variable names. Also, it helps to choose meaningful and relatable variable names. Generally, it is considered good practice in programming. What I mean by this is, for example, when working on a project related to a bookshop, using variables that reflect the domain or content of the project can make your code meaningful and relatable. Rather than using generic names like X or value, you can choose to use more descriptive names like book title, author name, or number of copies to represent the specific data associated with books in the bookshop. One last thing that I want to talk about before we wrap up is comments. Comments are simply code lines that never run. Notice that we have all of this written here, but if we click here, nothing happens. Let's say that we have, let's write an actual line of code. Let's say print 8 plus 2. Let's save that, and then let's run this code. Of course, you're going to see the results printed here on the console. Now, if we turn this into a comment just by placing this pound sign here front of this line of code, and let's save. Now let's try to run the same code. Notice that we do not have anything returned to us, showing that this line of code was not executed. Why am I talking about comments? Comments are necessary as they could provide explanations or instructions or document your code or temporarily disable certain parts. This is exactly how to write comments for single lines. This pound sign shows single comment lines, but let's say that we had multiple lines of code and wanted to comment them out all at once. I am going to have the code wrapped with 3 quotation marks at the start and 3 quotation marks at the end. This is how to comment out multiple lines. But if you want to comment one line after the other, then you use the pound symbol. You can simply comment out your code by combining the control and / keys of your keyboard. Let's say that I want to comment out this line of code. Then all I have to do is select it and then press control and / keys of my keyboard together, and you can see that it turns into a comment. These are the basics to know to get started with writing code in Python. That's all that we are going to cover in this lesson. In the next lesson, we are going to talk about more data types in Python, like the string data type, like the Boolean data type, and so on. So this is where we draw the curtain today. If you have any questions or comments, please say them in the comment section. Also, remember to like, subscribe, and share the video. Thank you. See you in the next lesson.